Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this morning's Council Executive. Firstly, do we have any apologies?
Yes, Convener, I have apologies from Councillor Garner and from Councillor Bowes.
Okay. Thank you. Any declarations of interest?
Convener, I'll declare interest in the Jane Diamond 7 dig in community food growing strategy because I've got an allotment and I'll recuse myself for that.
Okay, right, thank you for that, Councillor Bissett. And can I say to members, if we could stay behind at the end of the committee just for a very brief 5 minutes session where Mr Gillespie is going to take us through the annual assurance statement for housing. It's something that we have to do for the regulator, and we just appreciate having a quick session just with members just to go through that and make sure they're comfortable with what's been submitted. Okay, can we move to item 3, the minute of the meeting from 27th of August. Happy to accept. Okay, thank you. And the rolling action log. Okay, thank you. Thank you, excuse me. Item 5 is the Audit Committee, the Corporate Risk Management update. Ryan, are you going to give that?
Yes, thank you, Convener. This has just been referred on from the Audit Committee, which gave due consideration to it at its meeting on the 16th of September. I think it's fair to say that the Audit Committee gave it a good kick around, and there was a lot of discussion and questions on the quite extensive content. And having done so under due governance process, it's been referred on to the Executive now with the recommendation that the Executive considers and approves the Corporate Risk Register as appended.
No questions, Convener. Just happy to move the report.
And I'm happy to second.
Any particular questions? Okay, thank you. Oh, sorry, Pat.
It's just to increase my knowledge of acronyms in one case. 4.2 contest acronym. What the heck's that?
Brian, are you able to help us out with that? Or anybody help us out with that? Robert?
Say that again. Oh, right. Oh, well. Perhaps that's why I don't know it in that case. Just a general question. It says that EPI was not required for this report, and neither was the sustainability environmental impact not required for the report. In essence, it's within the report, if you know what I mean, but it seems strange that the risk doesn't take into account the consequences for inequality and poverty and for the environment.
Okay.
Or is that, in essence, doing it itself?
Yeah, I think it's just because the report itself,
Yeah.
its essence is risk.
It's
nothing
assessment,
further beyond,
yeah.
whereas obviously the structure there is designed quite properly to catch more conventional reports where risk needs perhaps to be teased out more explicitly. So I think it does seem a bit paradoxical, but I think there's an underlying logic or explanation for it.
I think also because it's a factual report as opposed to what we would normally see by way of policy, etc.
Yeah.
It's a statement of where we are and what we're doing.
Yeah. It's just another question. It's just really for my own information in these questions that we'll set up Council of the Future Board and other boards. That's a baby, but that baby seems to be producing other children. What example is the Enabled Communities Board, and who's on it?
Okay, Kenneth, who would
You might recall when we brought the business plan report to the executive in May, there were 5 work streams that sat under the business plan, of which enabled communities was one of these. So it's an officer board in terms of driving forward that programme of work and the projects that sit underneath it.
So they will report to their parent board, who in turn will report to us. Yeah. On a similar, the corporate participation group. Who's that? Or who's them?
Sorry, what page?
It's, I think it's page 44. Although my iPad gave up on me this morning. But I think it was to do with corporate planning, the corporate participation group.
Again, I think it just, as the name suggests, there is a particular corporate group focused on that central part of the council, of the future agenda going forward, capturing the locality planning dimension and the overall need, whether it's participatory budgeting and the other various strands, to properly engage with our communities as we take this agenda forward.
I think our new recruit to corporate planning is about to come in.
Pass the back.
Thank you. Yes, this is a group that's chaired by Carolyn Binney, and make sure that we've got one approach to how we're doing the participation and making sure that it ties in with all participation across the council, so we're bringing all the services strands into one.
Right. So that follows on from the scrutiny. Okay. Thanks, Convener. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Munro.
Thank you, Convener. We had a very successful risk training on the last week, and we learned lots. And yet, on agenda item 9, it says under investment zone, which is a huge topic, it just says a full risk register has been completed. So we're not really able to look into anything there. I wonder.
I think we can maybe deal with that when we get to that particular item, and around the risk register, but it is included within the corporate risk register. You will find that there's a strand there that refers to economic development. Okay. Okay. Any further questions? Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Item 6 is the Strategic Housing Investment Plan, and Mr Gillespie, are you going to take us through that?
Convener, thank you. The purpose of this report is to approve the Strategic Housing Investment Plan, otherwise known as the SHIP, for 2020-21 to 2024-25 for submission to Scottish Government. Section 2 of this report outlines the recommendations, and I'll come back to these at the end. Within Section 3 of the report outlines the purpose of the SHIP and sets out our strategic investment priorities for the next 5 years, which ties into our local housing strategy, better known as our LHS. The plan sets out the plan for 2018 to 2024 set out proposed projections to deliver 1,371 units of affordable housing over that 5-year period. Scottish Government issued update guidance in August 2019, which highlighted that the SHIP is required to be produced and submitted annually, covering the following 5 financial years. Guidance also highlighted that the SHIP is a corporate activity requiring close working collaborative between council services and partners. Government and other stakeholders in the SHIP development process are also required. We also work very closely with colleagues across services to ensure that town centre sites are explored as part of our LHS and SHIP process. Section 4 sets out our future 5-year programme and resource assumptions, which you can see. The proposed SHIP updates the previous report position with an expected delivery of over 1,800 affordable units. This is an increase of over 430. A total grant funding is required of 102 million to deliver all projects detailed in the SHIP. There is therefore a grant funding shortfall of 35 million over the next 5 years to deliver all the projects listed in the SHIP. Discussions are ongoing at present with Scottish Government to secure the required additional funding. Also within the report, Link Housing have advised that they have completed stock evaluations to support an increase in their borrowing capacity, Link were sold land by Falkirk Council at affordable housing use value at various sites across Falkirk in the past, and the council imposed burdens on the titles to prevent any subsequent sale for an alternative use for an increased value. The proposed variation in valuation proposed by Link will require a discharge of the title burdens for these sites to replace with a contractual obligation on identical terms, and they have asked the council to consider this. Link have long established Link tenancies and they have no plans to alter this, and tenants will be unaffected by the proposed changes. Any proposed changes would also require approval from the Scottish Housing Regulator. Section 5 highlights the consultation taking place in regards to the SHIP itself. Section 6 of the report outlines our financial position with ongoing discussions with Scottish Government regarding our grant assumptions. 2/3 of the cost of council new build programme is met from the HRA, the other third is from grant funding. The report also seeks approval for the acquisition of 2 sites, King Street, Stennismuir and Denny High School Phase 2, subject to the necessary requirements and process. This will generate a capital receipt for the general fund. Resources for this purchase will be met from existing HRA budgets. In conclusion, the SHIP demonstrates our ambition to deliver over 1,800 affordable housing units. After taking account of any slippage, there are sufficient projects included within the SHIP to fully utilise and exceed the allocated grant funding over the next 5 years. Officers will continue to review and manage the SHIP to maximise the amount of available funding from Scottish Government. It's worth also highlighting in the past where we have had shortfalls of funding, we've been very successful in achieving additional funding to meet the full requirement of our SHIPs. Convener, finally, I would outline section 2 of the report, the 4 recommendations for the Executive to consider. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr Gillespie. Councillor Hughes.
Thank you, Convener. Scottish Government guidance highlights that the SHIP is a corporate activity, section 3.7. This entails close working and collaboration between council services and partners, including IJB Integrated Joint Board, RSL, Registered Social Landlords, communities, developers, the Scottish Government and other stakeholders in the SHIP development process. The Strategic Housing Investment Plan is staggering in complexity, ambitious in outlook, and aims to deliver 1,806 affordable housing units, 1,063 Falkirk Council properties. Broken down, that means 613 council new build properties and 450 buybacks, and 743 other RSL, Registered Social Landlord properties. Generally, projects included in the SHIP contribute to the local community, providing new employment training opportunities, contribution to local economic growth, improvements and investment in local communities. In Appendix 1, pages 76 and 77, the Strategic Housing Investment Plan 2020-2025 is outlined, highlighting the depth of approach and the communities benefiting across the Falkirk Council area. In section 4.3, there is a change in emphasis and approach in that the SHIP will target larger sites with the aim of increasing the overall supply of council homes. In section 4.6, the aim is to maximise the number of new builds suitable for elderly ambulant tenants by increasing the number of accessible homes. In section 3.8 highlights the need to consider regeneration when the local housing strategy, and as an example of this approach, town centre sites will be explored as part of the local housing strategy and the Strategic Housing Investment Plan process. This report demonstrates with examples the extent of collaborative working that has contributed to the SHIP development process. Section 3.7 states that as part of the SHIP review, the Scottish Government will comment on how stakeholders have been involved in developing and delivering the plan. I am confident that the SHIP will be seen as exemplary and be used as an example of good practice. I commend the recommendations as set out in section 2.1 to the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hughes. Councillor Alexander.
I second the paper and reserve the right to come back later.
Okay, thank you. Okay, any members? Councillor Nimmo.
Actually, just a question, convener. Kenny, you mentioned obviously the £35 million shortfall. When are we likely to have a decision for the Scottish Government whether we're getting that fully funded, or what's our fallback position?
The SHIP is a 5-year programme, so we have enough funding at present for the first 2 to 3 years, and we use assumptions. So we're in constant contact with the Scottish Government, and also what happens is we've been very good in the past of picking up where other local authorities have not managed to complete their SHIPs, so I'll call it what we call shovel-ready projects. All our projects in here are quite advanced, so Scottish Government quite enjoy working with us because they can actually use some of their additional funding that we get from other authorities, so we've been really successful. So we've got enough to cover us for the first 3 years, but because it's a 5-year programme, I had to put that in for make sure that members were aware of the potential.
Okay. Councillor Reid.
It's congratulations on a very, very good report, especially compressed into 22 pages. I was about to say an example for others, but we'll leave it at that. Page 58 talks about the advantage of having a significantly larger sites rather than 20 here and 30 there. I think I asked the questions, but I forget where it was and when it was. Will we ever have a really big council estate again? I know we don't own much land, but...
Yep. You did ask that question before, yes.
Where was it?
It was at, I think it was at the Enabling Communities event that we did have,
Right.
and you'd asked that up the back. Or also, in fact, it was maybe the allocations where we had all members as well, and future allocations, I think, was
Okay.
the time. We have some bigger sites, I think we'd spoken about at the time as well. It was additional villages, the size of site that we were talking about, could we build, and the land that we have now, we certainly are using up. The bigger sites, as you can see from the SHIP, we've got 3 that are circa about 100, which is, again, ambitious for ourselves. It's not to say in the future that we will need to look at other properties, sites and other land that we may need to buy, albeit if we buy from private developers or land out with, that will increase the cost of us developing. So it's not that I would rule it out, but there is enough land at the present time, and any available land that comes in within the council, i.e. from the general fund, part of the process is for the housing service to look at it for any potential building.
Okay, thanks. You made a reference to the former Denny High School phase. A wee bit circumlocution here, I think. Requires resolution of a number of factors relating to sports facilities. Is this...
There is still some ongoing discussion about the phase 2. It's a large site, and as I said, that once that's concluded, one way or another will allow us to then decide whether we can build on it or not. That will not take anything away from the SHIP, because as you've seen the SHIP there, what we also have for members is what we call a shadow SHIP, is other projects that we try and get, when I mentioned earlier, shovel ready, that can come in and support that, and we build in a percentage of slippage within the SHIP as well.
The link development to Williamson Street, making very good progress. It comes top of the league in terms of points. Is that because it's in the town centre?
It will be, but also the specific nature of the build. It's for predominantly for elderly, and it's a targeted group, and that was one of the reasons why it was supported by ourselves and pushed through some other additional requirements. It certainly meets our housing need and demand assessment for the town centre, something that was in great demand.
Yeah. I think a lot of people lived there at one time. My granny was just across the road in the Glasgow buildings.
I've seen some of the old pictures, Councillor.
You take them.
I'm on a hobby horse here, page 70. I've been in correspondence with Councillor Colley and Councillor Hughes, a very civilised exchange, I may say. It makes a change from blowing hot air across the committee rooms. But there's a reference there to make the best use of communal facilities in older people's housing developments. In our case, council-owned clubrooms. And there's an exercise underway for some time now, about a year, which has not contributed to the increasing the morale of some of the people involved. So how does that reference tally with that exercise then? If I take, for example, Greenbank, that the club room's closed, and I emphasise that it's through no fault of the exercise, but it was maybe going to happen anyway. But was that not an opportunity for the council to move in and use that facility in terms of this policy?
Absolutely. This is for ourselves, but also our partners, our RSL partners as well, because they've got a lot of communal properties within their functions. We are looking at these things. We have plans behind the scenes to do, but as you're aware, Councillor, it's not just one committee room, there are 2 or 3, and we're waiting until we actually conclude them all to look at what we're planning to do. There is great ideas that we have up there, working with our colleagues in IGIB in regards to potential drop-in hubs, centres, things like that. But also, if there is availability for them, we can also look at turning them into adapted properties, or, which again helps people who obviously are needing them, which is our greatest demand at present time. But that will come after we've made sure that we've had full discussion with the communities, which we are doing now, but also taking on the vision that we have about empowering communities. And I think that's the thing that we're doing up there, is actually empower them to try and run that as their own community hall, to look at how they can utilise it better. From my other role, as we were speaking earlier, one of the areas that I'm striving to do is for groups to actually take them and drive them forward to be what I'll call a greater benefit to the community, and for us to be a support and a critical friend rather than somebody that tells them what to do. So I'm looking for them to try and stand on their own feet and manage it, because that gives them more purpose, I feel, for the group, but also gives them more flexibility to fully utilise the common room themselves.
The conversion of the club room, of course, could result in one better, I was going to say betterly, that's my English teacher stuff enough, a better use for that one individual, but it could be to the detriment of the other 83 people in the flat.
And that would be something that would be something to take into account, because it's quite a close community. There is quite a few common rooms up there, and again, it's what we can best use or better provide in the other common rooms as well, depending what we do with any of the kind of financial or upgrades of the other place, or future plans that these committees have, because there is a few up there who have actually welcomed this and who see this as a better opportunity to provide better services for some of their areas.
However, it does appear that housing are ploughing their own furrow here, and there's this wider policy of closer at home and closer to home.
Yeah. One of the areas I also is I chair the Housing Contribution Group, which is obviously involving all partners, and these things are discussed at that to see what is best and not just in isolation for our communities.
Right. So housing are feeding into the strategy?
Definitely, we're feeding and also helping leading on that, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Can I ask if there's still continuing discussions with the various groups within the flats about how we could take this forward?
There is continued discussions. There is more than half, I think, signed up to the new lease agreements, and also how we can promote better use. We've had CVS have been involved in some of them as well, helping supporting, and what we want to do further once we get to a final position is then have a plan what we're going to do with all the projects up by.
Okay. Okay, Councillor Munro.
I think my question was along similar lines in view of the elderly demographic and the challenges we face in providing care to them, and having clusters of elderly people together, and having viewed your a facility for looked after children only the other week. Are there any of these properties that are being shown here that are going to do something similar, and what proportion of the new build is for elderly?
It's very difficult at the present time to say how many are for elderly. What I can say is that our last year we had 80% for elderly. That was our target, because we have to wait till the plans are fully developed. What I can say there is, of the plans that are developed now, there's over 60% of our elderly ambient and disabled. But that will always increase when we get plans, when it goes through due process. Certainly from a council perspective, all properties ground floor are fully disabled adapted and for elderly ambient. But we also, 3 bedrooms, we make sure that when we're building them, the stairs are extra wide as well, corridors, so it's a house for life, for their family. So if they needed to get up, it's not just about the parents, it's about the children. And if we needed to put stair lifts and things like that, there is still room to walk up the side of the stair lift instead of causing additional risk. Because if you put one at the present time of build, it can be very difficult to get by. So certainly all our buildings are built to future-proof all eventuality.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Happy to agree. The Dig-In Community Food Growing Strategy. And I think we might have a wee presentation.
Yes, we do. If it's all right with you, Convener, I'll just do a bit of a introduction in relation to the process here, and then my colleague Mandy Brown, who is the brains behind this outfit, is going to do a bit of a presentation on the interesting bit, which is the content. Just in terms of process, members will recall that we presented a draft of this document earlier this year when it was agreed for the work consultation. The document itself is the strategy document, but it's supported by a number of action plans which are listed in paragraph 3.5 of the report. The first of which is the allotments action plan, and the allotments action plan is included as part of this report and has been consulted on. The consultation process itself, obviously in preparation of the document, there's been a significant amount of consultation, as you would expect, with stakeholders, and I think that's why the draft was as robust as it was. But in terms of the formal consultation, that was undertaken in a period of 12 weeks from the 11th of February until the 13th of May. And the Appendix 2 to the report gives information in relation to comments that were received during the consultation. The substantive issues, I think, really captured in paragraph 5.6. There were sites that the consultees considered were inappropriate, and those where they thought they should be more included, as a consequence of which the amendments are described, as I say, in paragraph 5.6. In summary, that's to remove one site and to include 11 of the additional sites that were suggested. So I think that's a really positive outcome, that there are more opportunities for sites to be identified coming forward. I think it just shows the level of interest that there is in communities as well. Financial implications for the council could be significant. There's been no additional funding, ring-fence funding provided for this activity, and the details as to the potential cost for allotments are described in paragraph 6.2 of the report. However, I think that there is a level of support within the community, so fundraising could be quite positive, and also we'll just need to address this as part of our budget setting process. I'm conscious Brian sitting next to me. Moving forward as the strategy actually begins to roll out. So that's the process we've undertaken. I obviously will commend the revised strategy to you for approval, but maybe I can ask Mandy Brown, as I say, my colleague, if she'll give us a wee bit of a presentation as to what's in the strategy and what we're aiming to do with it.
Okay. Right, thanks, Mandy. If you could, that would be helpful.
Is that working okay from here? Right, okay. I'll be really quick because I know you've got a lot to get through today. But I just wanted to do a couple of minutes on some of the community involvement that's gone into creating the strategy. For those who don't know me, I'm Mandy Brown. I'm one of the planning officers in the Planning Environment Unit in Development Services. So there's a couple of reasons that we started thinking about the food growing strategy. One of them was our Falkirk Green Space strategy from 2012-2013 time. We had 9 priority themes, one of which was community growing, because we realised that we needed to do more as a local authority to encourage people to grow their own fruit and veg. And then a couple of years after that, the Community Empowerment Act came in and really almost forced our hand, although we were already thinking about it, and told us that we needed to write up a food growing strategy. So to do that, what we needed to do is find out what was happening in our area already, and it turns out There was tons of stuff going on. There's, Councillor Bissett already mentioned, there's the allotments at Bintaskin. The Allotment Society also runs allotments at Calendar Park. We've got community growing in Muir Ravenside. There's tons of wee projects all across the area, a couple of which are mentioned on the slide at Dollar Park, at Kersey Bank. Some of the housing associations also run projects with their tenants, or their tenants run projects within the housing association land, however you want to look at it. Up at Kinneil Wall Garden, for the last 2-3 growing seasons, there's been 2 lads in growing food for it that goes to the food bank in Bowness. That's a form of community growing because they can bring in volunteers to help them. And also right across the school estate, there are orchards and wee community growing plots that the teachers are doing with the kids and their parents. So there's actually a lot of stuff happening in the area, despite the fact that we weren't out there waving our finger telling people to do it, which is great news. But we wanted to know if there were other folk out there wanting to grow stuff. And if there were, we wanted to know what it was that was stopping them from doing it. My whole focus for the strategy was to try and create a document that helped people to get on and grow stuff. It's part of that enabling people rather than empowering people. I guess that comes later. So to show people how to do the food growing, how to get their projects underway. So it wasn't about what we're going to do to help you. It was about come and work with us, work with our partners, and we can get some stuff happening. So in terms of the consultation, the very first thing we did was speak to the people that knew what they were doing. We went up to the Allotment Society, to their AGM back in 2016, had a wee chat with them. We invented a project called Dig in Falkirk, which was about providing some demonstration sites in the High Street in Falkirk to show people how little space they needed to actually grow stuff. You can do it in very urban areas. The idea with that was that we worked with Forth Environment Link and Falkirk Delivers. We took some of the existing planters, got them cleared of the municipal shrubberies that were in there, and attracted various community groups and business groups to come and work with us to actually take over some of these plots. Worked very well the first couple of years. We're needing to go back and revisit how we run this now, but it was a very successful project in terms of I would go out periodically and the informal conversations that you could have with people as they were passing by, because I was wearing a bright orange t-shirt and not council clothes. So they didn't know I was the council until they said nice things, and then I told them I was the council. So we actually got quite a lot of very informal information off people about whether they wanted to get involved and why they were or why they weren't getting involved. We also did the usual kind of stuff. We did online surveys. We turned up at other people's events to ask people questions. We ran a couple of our own events. We did one Eat the Street event as part of the THI, Townscape Heritage Initiative finale, would have been last summer, where we just did a whole load of foodie activities. But we also did a thing called Falkirk Grows Food. Turns out that was back in October 2017, and that was where we brought as many community groups, individuals, whoever we could think of who were interested in getting involved in growing fruit and veg in the one place to talk about the barriers, the opportunities, and how we can make things easier for them. And we basically bribed them with lunch and some nice workshop activities in the afternoon. So that was a good day. And what people told us from that was that they needed help finding land, they needed help putting groups together, they needed help finding funding. They wanted to learn how to grow fruit and veg. There's a lot of people reckoned they couldn't do it. So they needed some support with events, with some learning workshops. They wanted to meet up with each other so they could share ideas and what have you. So the basis from this was what we took to our stakeholders, our next step. We did a stakeholder consultation the following month, where we took all the issues and the barriers and the problems that the communities had identified, and we said to the various organisations that had come along on our stakeholder day, this is what the community is telling us. What is it that you can do to make these barriers go away, to help them get their projects up and running? And that basically formed the basis of the draft strategy, which would have come to committee probably in January this year. And it set out more or less detailing what the community said and what the organisation said they could do to fix it. As Rona said, that went out for a 12-week consultation period, come back with very few changes. And I like to think it was because we'd done all this community work beforehand. It might just be because nobody knew about it, I don't know, but we'll go with it was because we'd done all this community work beforehand. And that's turned into the document that you've been asked to have a look at for today. I'm very nearly finished. Just wanted to have a quick mention of the next step, because we tried to keep the document as slim as we could, believe it or not. We decided to put a lot of the meat of how we actually take the strategy forward into action plans. So the allotment action plan's already been included with this document, because that's probably the most complex and costly part of bringing the food strategy together. And then we'll do a phased approach for the other action plans so that we can detail what resources are required and how we're going to help people to do orchards and more pocket allotments and what have you that's detailed there. That was it. Thank you.
Andy, thank you very much for that. I think that was really helpful, just getting a run through and the understanding, particularly of the community engagement, involvement and the co-production of this strategy. I think that's been really helpful. Can I open it up now?
I would
Councillor Hughes?
just like to propose that that the report be accepted. While listening to the presentation, I was struck by how much work has been put into the whole project. You know, starting with mapping exercises, finding out what is already out there in the community, the consultation, the Dig in Falkirk, Eat the Street, Falkirk Grows Food, people suggesting they needed land, better access to support, and stakeholder consultations, followed by action plans. What a wealth of activity, and the outcome is what I would describe as excellent. So I would recommend to committee that the report is accepted.
Okay, thank you.
Happy to second the same, convener, and reserve the right.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Harris?
Thank you, convener. Just a query on para 6.2, that's on page 82. I just find there's a kind of contradiction here, which I can't rationalise myself. It's talking about the costs and for large and small projects. And at the end of the paragraph, it says such costs would require external funding and local funding, fundraising by the respective site management groups. And then in the next sentence, it implies that we're going to be, for the council to make, it doesn't currently have budgetary provision, but would require to address it. Are we saying that the council is going to have to make budgetary contribution towards these, rather than relying fully on external funding and local fundraising?
Mrs. Gansley, yeah.
Thank you, convener. Yes, it's really a combination of both, and reading it again, I do realise that the two do seem to be a bit contradictory. It will really be a combination of both of these things. The council has a statutory responsibility in relation to allotments and the provision of allotments, so that's obviously something that we are required to do, but as with a number of things that we are required to do, external funding can often assist us with those obligations. So we will endeavour to fundraise, we will look to sources of funding through other green sources of funding. There are other funding streams that we can tap into, but ultimately we may require to make provision within our own budgets to deliver our statutory responsibilities. And you'll see that in the council's budget. Often you'll see there are particular projects identified in the capital programme, for instance, but there is a recognition that some of that will be funded externally, and we're going to come on to talk about the education contributions to planning projects. That's an example of that, where the council would recognise in its capital programme that it has an obligation, but it would also equally recognise that there's external funding that can help support that obligation.
Thank you.
Does that help?
Yeah, just another small comment. I noticed actually on an earlier photograph a very young child holding up a bunch of carrots. We've just spent quite a considerable amount of money on ELC and expanding our nursery provision. We're going to have an awful lot of under 5 gardeners. Can we be sure that you're tying in the Dig-In project with the education department and make sure that...
Yeah.
you'll have heard me say this often, that our young people are our greatest evangelists for anything to do with sustainability and the environment, whether it's about waste and recycling or whether it's about these sorts of projects. There's already a very significant engagement with schools throughout the council area, and we're just hoping that that can grow further with, as you say, all our new young gardeners that are going to be joining us.
If you remember back to the presentation we had around the marvellous meals, part of that is around actually the children planting, growing, the food harvesting, and going through that process. So yes, absolutely. Councillor Nimmo.
Thanks, Convener. Rona, you mentioned obviously the statutory responsibility. There's nothing in here about how much this has cost in staff time so far. Do we have any indication as to what's been spent already?
We haven't broken that down because we generally don't do that, but I think you can see from the presentation the amount of work that's been done by council staff, Mandy particularly, but also her colleagues. And I have to say I'm grateful, obviously very grateful to Mandy and her colleagues for making such a good job of this. So no, we haven't costed it separately. There's also been a lot of input from communities as well to this project. So I can't answer that question, but it's part of our normal work stream that's just included in our work plan for the year, Development Services work plan for the year.
But the workload could increase, obviously, depending on the take-up for the allotments and that as well. So there'll be increased costs involved there.
It's likely that, yes, there will be, because, as I say, we have a particular responsibility. We have a responsibility to deliver, to create the strategy and to oversee its delivery. And we also have specific obligations in respect of allotments. So that workload will continue, yes.
Okay. Just another question, Convener. Page 81, there's a table there, and Lauriston is listed, but it's not been added, and the address is down as unclear. I'm just wondering if I can maybe get some clarification in relation to that, what site's actually being talked about.
It was somebody on the online consultation as part of the formal consultation had suggested that there used to be allotments in Lauriston which have since been built on, but there was a piece of open space near those allotments that we could consider as a community growing site or an allotment site. Now, unfortunately, as part of the consultation, we didn't collect email addresses of those who were responding, so we couldn't go back to them to clarify exactly where that was. I did ask somebody that grew up in Lauriston, and I've asked around, and he didn't know where those allotments were. If we can find out what that site is, if anyone knows, I'm happy to go and have a look at it. But I think the one thing that I meant to mention as part of that presentation, which I didn't, if a site's not included on the maps here, it doesn't mean that we're not going to support a group who want to do some growing activities there. All we've done is we've made suggestions of the sorts of land people might want to think about, but there'll be all sorts of bits of land that people would rather grow on that we haven't shown, because you can never speak to everyone. So if that site comes forward in the future and a group want to get going with a project there, then we'll help them.
Okay, thanks for that, man.
Councillor Reid.
I noticed a young lady holding up the carrots had red hair. Is there a connection? Just one point. I think the appendices might have been better as background papers. It's quite a large document. I know Mandy's Zeal quite well. Every environmental event you go to, there's Mandy there. At weekends as well. So congratulations to her. There were only 16 responses, which I think would have been disappointing.
I think it's just, as Mandy said, there was so much by way of consultation in advance that is was heartening for us, I think, to see that it was generally accepted. And I think the other thing that was heartening from the responses is that they were actually quite constructive and sensible, and a lot of them have been adopted. So it's the level of pre-engagement with stakeholders, I think, that is resulted in that apparently low response. But I think the other thing that's worth saying is that this is a living document, as Mandy has mentioned, and that if people come along out with it, we have to have this formal process because we have an obligation to create this strategy. but no one will be more pleased than us if people come along and say, we found a site. In fact, Councillor Bowes has been speaking to Mandy about a site in his ward. If people come along and say, we found a site and we're all wanting to do this, then that will just get added in, and they may not have responded to this, but they can't. That doesn't mean to say that they can't be part of the process moving forward.
I remember some years ago, Hull Glen Phase 6, which is not in the sites indicated here. You know, as you approach Hull Glen, the little lane down the left that takes you under the railway, there's a site behind the council houses. But was that considered? It's a large area of ground and it's never used even for kids to play on.
I've got a feeling that might have been one that somebody's asked about, and either I've not known where it is and couldn't go back and ask them, or I have gone back and thought, I'm not sure, but if you're saying it's a good site, then it's something that we can consider.
You have mentioned the field to the south of that, the one immediately adjacent to the railway.
Maybe I thought that was the same place.
Yeah, to the south. Yeah.
Officer error.
I can maybe talk to you later. About that one. I hate to pour cold water on anything, even using a watering can, but the high street plots are not looking good at the moment. They're full of weed. Because I actually went to pick some kale and there was just this one little thing sticking up. Because I noticed somebody picking it up the week before. So are these attended to on a regular basis?
I'm actually going to go out this afternoon. The groups in the first 2 years had a lot of support from Forth Environment Link and me from the council, and there's been a lot less support this year because we were experimenting with letting them get on with it, and as a result some of them haven't been able to get out as often as we would like, so we're looking at a new model for that. We're going to effectively master plan all the plots so we know exactly what needs to be done and when. Forth Environment Link will still manage the project for us, but they'll have a better idea of what's in every plot, who's looking after it, what needs to be done, and when they have their sort of corporate social responsibility volunteer days, which they have a lot, we can send those people up and down the high street. We're also looking at putting in lower maintenance edibles, so possibly herbs and some fruit bushes and stuff, so that they will look better going forward. There's at least 3 corporate social responsibility business days coming up in the next couple of months, so by the end of the year they should look a lot better. They always look bad at this time of year, but I accept that because of their location we need to do something a bit more. If it still doesn't work, we'll have to look at another model again, but I think this should fix it going forward.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
I know that I've seen an occasion where there was the community contribution to reading things as well. So I think people who pass by tend to do something with it as well. But we've been engaging with Forth Environment Link very recently. I was speaking to Jules Ryan only yesterday about it, so we're on it. But I think it's just that, I think, as you say, the corporate social responsibility, because that's structured and it's businesses that provide that, that's an opportunity for us to say there's a group of people turning up, we need to direct them to the work that is needed to be done. But I think it's about encouraging people to continue to be involved in the process, rather than it dwindling away and not being a success, because it's a great idea.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Coombs.
Thank you, Convener. Following on from what Rona's just said, yes, it is a great idea, but again, like that, it's keeping that momentum going. And I just wondered, is there a set criteria as to what the commitment is from people? You know, that way it's like when people come along to plant them, are they aware, as the owner of a large garden am, that it's not just planting the flowers and waiting until they grow, it's tidying up the mess at this time of the year as things do die off, and it's that continued responsibility. And you've said it yourself that now that the official backing isn't there, that these community groups are sort of dwindling away. How much are we expecting people to do for themselves? I get that, you know, the theory is great, but people just have other things to do with their time. Are we expecting too much from community groups?
It's why, I mean, that project in the heart of Falkirk, it's almost evidence in itself of why these projects need to come from within the communities. There needs to be a passion and a drive from the communities to set up the gardens. This one was done to demonstrate what could happen, and that's why there was a lot of support given to the groups initially.
Right.
But for community growing to work properly, the communities have to come to us, and we would still provide support for them to get themselves going. And there's a lot of organisations out there that can help, and it's about signposting people to those organisations, because at the moment, otherwise they're just relying on me, and I can't provide enough support for everyone. I can't be down every week at everyone's project. So we are asking a lot of communities, but we're not requiring them to do anything. It's if they want to come and work with us, then that's fine, we'll work with them.
And it's not a criticism. I mean, as I said, the theory is fabulous, but in the same way as when the council made the decision not to plant bedding plants and community groups went out to plant them, getting people to plant them didn't seem to be an issue, but the continued maintenance of the weeding and tidying up the beds isn't as... But it's not as much fun pulling weeds as it is planting plants. That's the bottom line. And I just wonder how sustainable it is. But anyway, I'll leave it at that. And obviously, because that one in the High Street is so visible. And I also think that it's the most visible, but it's possibly the least community minded, because that way you don't have everybody walks up the High Street, but nobody feels it's their space kind of thing. The other thing I was going to ask about was, I know it's phase 3, but how much support are you getting from NHS? Our partners are sometimes not the most amenable to work with. I don't know how far the conversations are going.
I haven't started the process on that. They were invited along to the stakeholder engagement, and I can't remember if they came along or not, but we'll start the process. I've got contact details for people I need to speak to in the NHS at the right level, so we'll push on with that and see how we get on.
Can I bring Patricia in, because Patricia's got a contribution just on that might be helpful for you, Mandy.
Hi Mandy, I'm Patricia Cassidy. I'm the Chief Officer for the Integration Joint Board for Integrating Health and Social Care. Be really keen to have a conversation with you about how in our localities we can tie in families and older people into some of your projects. I can certainly help you get into the NHS, as I sit as a corporate management team member of both the council and the NHS. I wasn't aware, pardon my ignorance, I wasn't aware this was all going on, but I think there's a lot that we can do together, so really pleased to take that further.
Excellent. There you go. Made a hole and filled it. Or dug a hole, should I say, sorry. Now wait, I think, what was the other one? The Kinneil Food Bank. I've actually spoken to the guys out there. They do a really good job, and if anybody's got like lots of apple trees and things like that, they will come along, climb the tree, pick the apples and take them and distribute them. Unlike the official food banks, the Russell Trust ones, they, as you've said, do give out fresh food. So for things like that, it's really, really useful, and they do a good job. Are they taking over the whole beds now that we're not using them?
That project in Kinneil Wall Garden, we're going through a master planning exercise just now. There'll be some further community consultation to find out what people would like to do with that site, but there is a potential that they could take on more of the space, but they could only do it if they could bring in sufficient volunteers. Yeah.
Because it's quite a large site. As I say, I know that they're in a small space at the moment. Now wait, I think, what was the other thing I said? Yeah, hopefully the fact that this meeting is open and the Falkirk Herald are here, they will hopefully highlight the fact that these opportunities are available for communities, and communities that maybe didn't take part in, as Pat says, your survey, your, oh for goodness sake, whatever it's called anyway, they didn't get involved then, they might get involved now. The Health Board. I think that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Munro.
Okay. In view of the fact that we have this plan here, and presumably it's going to be agreed today, is the plan now to move out to market to communities to encourage, and I notice you keep emphasising groups, although there are 40 individuals waiting for an allotment on this list here. So what we're looking for is groups to come forward. I feel there are some barriers in that, you know, the costs outlined, as my colleague said, in 6.2, but how are we going to proceed from here to go from 4 allotment sites to the sort of numbers we want?
That's part of the reason for doing the action plan, so we can put in clearly in black and white how we're going to do that. For the allotments, it's a slightly different beast to community growing. One of the advantages of community growing is it's more informal, and you can get together and do stuff on any sized bit of land, and you can learn very quickly just how much work's involved in keeping a plot weed-free and productive. The allotments, we have got as far as identifying potential sites for allotments, and the reasons for the costs is these sites need to be secured. We need to get some infrastructure into them so that they can actually be feasible allotment sites. We'll continue as per the action plan on doing that. For the community growing stuff, yeah, we'll have to market the fact that these opportunities could exist, and people, if they want to get involved, can get involved. I think in the strategy I've said that there will be a marketing and communication plan, if you like, which details how we do that. That's in draft form at the moment, so we'll get that out to show how we're going to publicise to people that they can get involved. But what we can't do is raise unrealistic expectations. We need to make sure people know that it's not the council that's driving this. It'll be coming from the communities, and they need to work with all sorts of different organisations to make it happen.
So you're saying community growing is somewhat easier than proceeding to the allotment option, which would incur these larger costs and would take a lot more involvement and planning to organise.
Yes, but we still have to look at providing additional allotments.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Alexander.
Yeah, I think that last point is a valid one, that it's not an either or. It's very much a both together, and we'll take the strategy both together. The irony is that if the costs increase, it's because of the success of the group. And so it's a double-edged sword there, and I would certainly welcome additional costs in that particular scenario. I know that some of your converts have been evangelical in their approach, my wife included. I've had 5 different types of jam this year, so put on half a stone. Thank you very much. All kinds of vegetables, and it's terrific. Absolutely terrific to eat this stuff out your own garden. When you know it's not cost you anything, it tastes better, I can assure you. You know, she's been preaching the gospel to her friends and neighbours, and now we've got a situation where when we were young, we used to go scrumping at the time. The kids nowadays, if they were to do what we did, they did, that generation, they have a marvellous choice, a choice that we didn't have. But that's not for publication, by the way. Councillor urges children to be more discreet in terms of their thieving. No, I can see the headline. Now, joking apart, there is a serious side to it, and it's not just a case of savings and money. It's not just a case of environment. It's a case of, in many cases, the alleviation of poverty, because many of the gardens have been turned over to fruit and veg for the simple reason that people are finding it difficult to purchase these resources, and they say that's perhaps a sad sign of the times, but the fact that there are individuals and the strategies in place to assist these people is so much reassuring. In relation to the project itself, and I think this is a marvellous project, a wee bit pale than it normally be this time of the year, because I was frightened to go into the back garden in case I handed a shovel. But I know others have taken to that like ducks to water. So allow me to continue. I do pick up the point, and I do agree with the point that sustaining that interest is always the difficult part. These things can come along and disappear as quick. But it sounds as if you've got, you know, the right attitude in terms of how to attract new sites, how to attract information and the community groups as well, and bring them both together, as it's been done successfully. So well done, and you know, look forward to the annual report showing increased costs because of production.
Okay, Councillor Reid.
Could I unusually come in again? I know where the allotments and orchards were in Lauriston. As you reach the top of the brae, you have the row of shops to the south. It was behind that where the housing scheme's built at the moment, where I live, in fact. Yeah, that's there are no open space left there.
It was a piece of land opposite that.
Yeah. They were all over the place. A very large orchard up there.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, on that, are we happy to accept the report? Okay,
Can I just say,
thank you.
Convener, both this presentation and the next one that we're going to do in the investment zone, they're both in the members' share files.
Okay. Can I thank Mandy for coming along today and giving us the presentation and talking us through that, answering all the questions. Much appreciated. We're just retrieving Councillor Bissett, who'll be planning his allotment. The Local Development Plan, Revised Supplementary Guidance, SG10, Education and New Housing Development. Mrs Geisler.
Thank you very much, Convener. Yes, this is, as I mentioned earlier, a report that relates to the supplementary guidance requirements that we have in respect of our planning obligations, and this one particularly relates to SG10, which is in connection with how contributions for education. The background to the status of supplementary guidance is well known by members, but once adopted, these various guidance documents become part of the development plan, have the same status as LDP. Our current LDP, as members will know, was adopted in July 2015, but the supplementary guidance was adopted to go with it at that time. We're currently, as you know, preparing a supplementary guidance to go with LDP2, which is due to be adopted in 2020. This one currently requires to be reviewed in the interim. The document itself is fairly, it was very important, but it's fairly extensive and detailed, as you would expect for something that needs to give developers and house builders some certainty around the contributions that will be required in relation to education needs. The reason for the review is required because of the changes around pupil and also the construction cost index. As you will know, the construction inflation is rising quite significantly. So there was a consultation period, as the report refers to, and it ran from the 11th of March until the 22nd of April, but then that was subsequently extended to the 31st of May because there was a request from stakeholders to have a longer period to consider it. Appendix 1 to the report provides the comments that were received together with our proposed response to all of those and the changes that have been incorporated. As we say at paragraph 4.2, some of the consultation feedback is accepted. It is important, we think, that there's further information on school roles and the annual capacity statement in respect of schools that's provided, and further background information on PPRs and construction costs, which are the reason for the changes. So we're happy to incorporate that. There is an absolute necessity for our conclusions in respect of contributions that we seek to be based on good evidence. So on that basis, we're content to include the information. We have had feedback, as you would anticipate, from developers to the effect that the contributions sought could end up impacting on the viability of projects and how that is sits in contrary to our requirements in respect of our housing land supply. However, there is a provision for, in those circumstances, for developers to provide us with a viability statement, and if indeed that is the case, that can be considered as a material consideration when planning applications come to be determined. Paragraph 4.4 of the report describes the process that will now go on to for adoption, should members be minded to approve the supplementary guidance today. And paragraph 4.5 describes the proposals that we have for implementing these changes once they are adopted, to give certainty to developers insofar as where an application has already received a minded to grant decision, then they will be the contributions will be sought will be based on the 2015 guidance rather than this updated guidance. The recommendations, convener, are contained in paragraph 2 of the report. I'm joined by some of my colleagues this morning, both from Development Services and from Children's Services, who have done all the work here. So if there are detailed questions, I'm sure they'll be happy to help me answer them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Geisler. Councillor Alexander.
Yes, convener. It's another tick in the box, another step on the way. And another cliche we want with regards to the development plan too. It's an important step, and it's one that is pretty straightforward, and it's also one that I think has been enhanced by the submissions from both departments. So I'd like to thank the officers responsible for the processing this as quickly as they have, and for the detail of the conclusions. So with that, convener, I'm happy to propose the acceptance of the recommendations at 2.1.
Thank you.
And happy to formally second.
Thank you, Councillor Hughes. Any member got any questions? Councillor Nimmo?
Just another question from myself, convener. If we as a council refuse a major housing application for whatever reason, and it goes to appeal and the appeal is upheld, do we still get planning gain?
Yes. Generally speaking, a reporter would ask us for our suggested conditions to be attached to any planning application that was subject to an appeal, and also they would ask if we had any suggestions in relation to terms of a Section 75 agreement, and that would be taken into account. It would be the reporter's decision at the end of the day, but yes, they would. It would be very, very unusual if they didn't include a requirement for contributions, and that requirement would be based on our LDP provisions.
Okay, Councillor Reid.
I've always thought there would be difficulties with a Roman Catholic school because they're coming from all over the place. How do we calculate the number of Roman Catholic children?
Okay.
There is a
Services,
for
Mr.
that.
Teed.
I think Richard Teed's probably the best person. He's much better versed in this than I am.
Hi. Yes, we calculate the proportion of pupils in any particular denominational, non-denominational, based on the same methodology. The pupil product ratio, the PPR that's mentioned in here, is much lower for denominational schools because there's a lower proportion. They're more widely spread than pupils who attend the local non-denominational primary. And the ratios have gone down a little bit from previous times. So, but they do reflect the actual numbers. We looked at I think it was about 35 housing developments over a 10-year period, which is all the housing developments over 10 houses in the Falkirk Council area, and about 4,400 houses, and worked out the proportions going to local schools from there. And we also got figures that divided it by flats and houses as well. So that's what factors into the pupil product ratios, which are then measured against the cost of building per pupil, which give the per house rates that we ask for. So if a denominational school has a capacity risk, and one that springs to mind is St Bernadette's, and a large housing development came along, then we would request a contribution based on that pupil product rate.
Which looks like 1/5. It's a ratio of 1 to 5, isn't it?
At the moment, I haven't got the figures in front of me.
I think it's maybe closer to a 10th, is it not?
Yeah, it's gone down a little bit. It was 0.09, which is really 1 pupil in every 10 houses pretty much, but it's gone down a little bit, but it does reflect actual numbers. The reason it was higher before was we were finding there were more pupils attending denominational schools from the housing developments that surrounded them, but the nature of the developments have changed over the years.
Okay, thank you. Where the council is the developer, I take it they still pay the same, with just an internal transfer of money?
It is, yes, yeah.
So we don't get any concessions?
No, there's the same, it's exactly the same rates applied to all housing developments.
I just noticed that in some other authorities, affordable housing, there is some dispensation given, but we've rejected such.
Yeah, that's one that I think the planners would probably have to answer. But yeah, that's been our approach for a number of years.
I'm just wondering because it's what they call social housing. I wish that phrase had never been invented, but for the social housing would be given some dispensation, but the answer is no.
There is a sort of a viability statement.
I think the important issue is that these are costs the developer requires to bear, including the provision of social housing in certain circumstances. That's a cost that the developer has to bear. So there really ought to be no difference. The basis of planning gain is that the development creates a deficiency, and the deficiency has to be addressed by the developer. Otherwise, the proposal, the application ought not to be granted because it places too much of a burden on public infrastructure. So if you look at the principle of that, is this is a deficiency that's created by the development, and therefore the developer requires to address that deficiency, notwithstanding the basis of occupancy of the houses. And that's the position that we've taken on now. It's not the occupiers that are required to pay, it's the developer that requires.
I understand that, yeah. I just wondered if because the council would automatically contribute towards the deficiency where a developer might have to be pulled in screaming. Yeah.
Well, I think generally that is a feature, but this gives the certainty to all developers that this is the expectation, and it is a robust basis for seeking those contributions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Coombs.
Thanks, convener. It's been touched on briefly, but I think that if we had that magic wand to wave, I think that negotiations are not the best way for the council to make sure that they get the investment required from the developers or the landowners or whoever it is that eventually we're debating the Section 75 agreements with. And I think that a prime example of how this system doesn't work is the Denny Eastern Access Road, whereby developers came back and argued their case. I mean, personally, I think in that case, they may have been right that what they were being asked for, but they had signed a contract and agreed to pay the money. And then as time went on, the council is now not only being asked to pay for it, but to be paying, I think it's somewhere in the region of £2.5 million more, I read somewhere, more than was expected. Can you give us an up-to-date?
I don't have those figures to hand. I think the thing about Section 75 and planning gain is that there are a number of tests that are laid down by government before we can seek these contributions. And we need to meet all of those tests before we can ask for funding. But it goes back to the fundamentals of what I said to Councillor Reid. If the development creates a deficiency, then the development has to bear the costs. And if Bernard would hear what he would be telling you, because he's told me this, is that it all goes back to the landowner. These are considered to be abnormal costs, along with potential abnormal construction costs, and these are sums that would reduce the value of the land. So that's where the hit comes. The developers will argue that it is a hit that they take, but it should really go back to the land, whatever arrangement they have.
The developers will reduce the price that they are offering the landowner,
yes,
because of the commitment that they have to make to the...
These would be abnormal costs. However, sometimes obviously there's a degree of negotiation at that end of the process. However, generally speaking, there ought not to be much in the way of negotiation here, because the methodology is quite straightforward and is clear in the document, and the basis for the calculations for the various proportions and the various elements that go into the calculation is clear as well, and it is robust in terms of how we got to those numbers. So we're confident, and this is why it has to be updated on a regular basis, otherwise it will cease to be robust and will be open to challenge. But we generally don't negotiate much on these, we just say that's your contribution calculated in terms of the supplementary guidance, and that's our expectation that you will meet that cost.
Okay, well, as I say, I mean, I think that there are a lot, as you said, it's as robust as it can be given the current circumstances. I don't know, I haven't read in detail the new planning bill that's coming out. Perhaps it'll help with, I don't know, a national levy or something like that that might make it easier, because I just think that there are a lot of holes here that when we get things at planning and the Section 75 is agreed, just because it's agreed and signed doesn't mean to say that it's actually going to happen. And 9 times out of 10, it's reduced council funding that then takes a further hit. And I just wonder where this kind of money comes from, because I say, I mean, I know the Deers, which wasn't ours in the first place, is now ours, plus quite a lot. Is the 10-year limit still in place? I know that if somebody starts phase 1 and pays their Section 75, we have to use the money within 10 years, or at least that was the case.
It depends on the provisions of each of the Section 75 agreements are legal documents, and they are the provisions of those are unique to each of the documents. So in some circumstances there will be time limits by which the funding has to be applied, and in some circumstances there won't. And for example, if there's to be provision of something off-site, say a contribution to something else, a school or a 3G pitch or a 4G pitch, for instance, it may, sometimes you can't put a limit on that, because if there are other funding streams that require to come in to pay that, you don't know when these are going to come in. So those would be circumstances where you wouldn't put a time limit on it. Although it ought not to be open-ended in terms of the guidance that I've referred to. Where it's something that's a contribution that goes straight into something that can be delivered early, then time limits are appropriate. But it ought not to be open-ended. You're supposed to put a reasonable time limit on it, so that the developer has certainty around application of these funds. But each of these is bespoke to the particular agreement and the particular circumstances.
I thought that was a standard anyway. And just a comment to finish off with, it's like what's viable for one is just huge profits for developers for others.
Move on now to Falkirk and Grangemouth Investment Zone, and we've got a wee presentation as well. But Rona, are you going to start us off?
Yes, I will. Have you got the leaflets? Let's get them circulated round. This is obviously a very significant project for the council. Just to say, I'm joined this morning by my colleague Laura McIntyre. Laura's relatively new to the council, but she's done an enormous amount of work in relation to this project thus far. I think, to pick up a point that's been made earlier on, and this must be one of the most significant pieces of work that the council has ever undertaken on, certainly in the time I've been here, which is, you will know, to be a very long time, and it's a very slim volume in terms of the actual project itself. That doesn't mean that everything in it isn't of great significance, and hopefully we'll come on to tell you a bit of that once we've got the technology working. You'll be familiar with the investment zone. We've spoken about this before. You'll also be familiar to a certain extent with the projects that are in it, which since the last time we spoke, when members agreed that we could submit the strategic outline case to both Scottish and UK governments, has moved on very significantly in that time. There's been an enormous amount of work that's been undertaken by particularly Douglas Duffin, my colleague, and other people in the service, and I've mentioned Laura's recent appointment to do this. The Chief Executive's been involved very heavily in the work that we've been doing with partnerships, as has the leader, and as part of the partnership that's been formed with industry partners to take this forward. And I think that that's one of the great strengths of this bid that we have, the fact that there is a significant partnership, and there's very significant contributions come from businesses to shaping the project itself and committing to expenditure moving forward. Well, I think we're ready. Thank you for that. The bid itself, as I said, requires to be submitted to UK and Scottish governments, and there is a commitment to a 50-50 support for each of these projects. There's been an undertaking given that all of Scotland will be covered by growth deals, whether they are city deals, whether they are growth deals in another form. And we're amongst the last to do that, and that's because we're special and we've got the best one that's coming forward, as you would expect, the one that's going to actually deliver the greatest impact to where we're going to go forward in Scotland. So as we say up there, the investment zone aims to deliver three things. What we're going to do for our area will be transformational. I think one of the important things that we need to say about the growth deal, and we've mentioned this before, is that this is, there's a very strong focus on Grangemouth and the industry in Grangemouth as part of our bid, and that needs to recognise, and we're making this case very strongly to both UK and Scottish governments, that we're special, we have Grangemouth, that Grangemouth is the beating heart of high-value manufacturing in Scotland, and therefore it's important to Scotland's economy and indeed to the UK's economy, should not be underestimated, and therefore our bid may on the face of it seem quite extravagant, but you have to look at it in the context of a national priority for some of these projects. So this will be transformational not just for our area, but it will be transformational in respect of the whole of Scotland and have a transformational impact on the UK as well. There's a very, very strong theme running through all of the projects of inclusivity. That's something which Scottish Government's very keen on, UK Government's mentioned, but as an organisation, inclusivity, the fact that there is to be benefit for everyone, all our citizens have to gain benefit from this significant investment is critically important, and you'll see that as we go through the projects as well. And as the largest carbon creating area in Scotland, we obviously need to look at the economic growth moving forward as being clean in terms of tidying that up. So the growth deal, as I mentioned, involves the two governments, UK and Scottish Government. It's as we say there, to support economic growth, to create jobs and invest in what are transformational projects. And there is a requirement for these projects to be transformational. They can't just be more of the same. They have to be something that makes a step change to the economy in the particular area. So what we're doing here is we're seeking that for Falkirk and Grangemouth to become an investment zone, so that there will be a zone there, which this is an approach we're taking, would be a zone for investment in the area to make these changes that I've just described. So this, in terms of this next slide, there are three themes, and as you can see, they're interconnected. None of these they've been renamed since the last time we spoke about it, but none of them has changed that significantly. We're talking about innovative industry. That is to recognise the industrial base that we currently have, particularly in Grangemouth, but also there's an element in projects there that recognise the bus manufacturing element that we have in Falkirk. And there's also, this is a sort of harder edge thing, this is around construction of and creation of a UK innovation district, and the fact that it's UK I think is really important, together with strategic sites which are listed on there. We'll speak a bit more about that in a minute. There's a national economic infrastructure. There's a desperate need for public infrastructure to support the transformation of the economic activity, particularly in Grangemouth, and that links in with the work that we're currently doing in our TIF. And then the last provision here is around great places. Now, we already are a great place, we all know that, but we need to make ourselves a bit greater, and that's around particularly the Green Agenda, around sustainable travel. There's a provision in one of the projects for a place development fund that bids can go into to be associated with the tourism and the town centres of Grangemouth and Falkirk. A whole systems approach is referred to in there, making sure that we can make this as inclusive as possible, as previously referred to. And then there's a potential for community energy infrastructure, particularly associated with Grangemouth, where one of the greatest heat producers in the land sits cheek by jowl with residents who are sitting in fuel poverty. So I suppose if we look at these in a wee bit more detail, Innovation 2050, this is about making Grangemouth an innovation centre of excellence for manufacturing and chemicals. We need to move away from the carbon-based industry that is currently sitting in Grangemouth onto something else, and there are particularly exciting projects that are emerging, the technologies are emerging to support us through carbon capture and utilisation and storage, that's the one I always forget. And then linked into that is the Sustainable Centre of Excellence in relation to the bus manufacturing as well, again linked to low carbon industry. One of the things that's become apparent in the work that we've been doing on this is that there is an absolute need for us to make sure that our local businesses are well equipped with the skills and the workforce to enable them to participate in this big change and this big innovative change. So there's a skills pathway project included in here for manufacturing industries, and there's also a very important link into the work that's currently going on to expand that work within our schools and within Forth Valley College to make sure that our local people, whether they be young or that little girl with the carrots, are going to be well equipped to come through and take these high value jobs. There's another element of this is around strategic sites for growing businesses. There are sites that are being identified in Grangemouth at the moment, potentially for joint venture work to create new businesses in that location, but there's also existing sites with Abbotsford next to where my offices are, Glenbervie. So there are sites there which we're hoping that the funding can be provided to have those, as Kenny mentioned earlier on, shovel ready for businesses to invest in. So that's the innovation one. Our economic infrastructure, this recognises the fact that we have in Grangemouth a number of sites which are of critical importance at a national level in respect of delivering services that are critical both to Scotland and to UK. So there's a real importance here. This is why this is national infrastructure. There's a real importance here to make the connections better between road, rail and sea. We have one of the biggest container ports in the UK, and there's a need to make better use of those interconnections there. So the projects that are described there would be included. That's the upgrade of the M9 Junction 5 and in Shira Road. Part of that is a TIF project at the moment, and we are currently looking at how the TIF projects will integrate with the investment zone to make sure that we get the best out of all of those. We're looking at improved access for the port, as I've mentioned. The port is in a position to has space within it for additional rail freight capacity, so it's very important that we recognise the need for more sustainable ways of getting freight in and out of that area. And there's a potential for a carbon dioxide link linked to the FPS, which will take the carbon dioxide back up the pipeline. A bit more technical than that, but again, really exciting opportunity for us to be at the forefront of the work around carbon capture. This is not work which at the moment is has a business case that is viable, but with funding to support more investigation into it, we're hoping that we can have demonstrator projects at Grangemouth that can be rolled out on a global basis. Finally, creating great places or making our great places even greater. The projects in here are around transport, the importance for us to have sustainable transport, and we're focusing there on a rail bus active travel interchange at Falkirk Grahamson, which we're hoping will be renamed Falkirk Central, and obviously we're working with the rail operators and infrastructure people in relation to this. They've already published a paper helpfully on a review that they've been doing in the Falkirk stations, which ties in very nicely with the work that we're doing as well. Falkirk Grangemouth Green Corridor, we already have some parts of a green link between Falkirk and Grangemouth. It's to make sure that is actually completed and make sure that there are people who would be going to work in these new businesses in Grangemouth that won't have to travel by car, and they'll actually be able to get there by more sustainable means, and obviously park and ride facilities as you would expect. Second project there relates to the Great Places Development Fund. This is a provision for contributions to significant projects that would either enhance enhance the for areas of Falkirk and Grangemouth in respect of the town centre improvements, but also for the significant tourism offering that we have, building on the tourism offering we have to make it even better. And this is the project that has a specific reference to inclusive growth and procurement. Although that's a thread that runs throughout the projects as I've described, we felt it was important to have something specific to make sure that that wasn't lost. And obviously we'll have place development plans for Falkirk and Grangemouth particularly. So this is a 15-year programme of investment. We are asking government for a very substantial sum of money, £235 million, it's on the next slide. But we are, as if Douglas were here, he would say we are agnostic about where that funding comes from. Although we are seeking that funding through the growth deal, and we believe we have a very strong argument as to why this area should receive this amount of money. We do recognise that it's a big ask of both governments in this context, and we are exploring other ways, other funds that may become available to allow us to augment some of this work here. So if you look to the most recent programme for government that's been published, you'll see that what we're trying to do here links in with every single element of that programme for government, particularly around sustainable growth and carbon reduction. So we're hopeful that we'll be able to link in with those areas of funding as well. So 15-year programme, obviously a lot can happen and will happen in 15 years, but the aspiration is to create an additional 6,000 jobs and add £3 billion to our area's economy. As I say, that's got of a national context. So our next steps are we will be submitting the bid, but we've actually done it now. Thank you very much, Laura, for all your work in doing that. And the nature of the bid itself, the document is attached as an appendix to the report. That's gone in, and we are just waiting now to hear the response. But both governments are a wee bit busy with other things at the moment, but we hope to attract their full attention shortly. Following an announcement from both governments as to their approval of the project, then we would have a period of negotiation which would take us to, we anticipate, March 2020, depending what happens over the next few weeks. That may or may not change. However, we would be expecting then to have heads of terms agreed, and then we would progress the detailed business cases associated with the elements of the projects that we're taking forward. The Chief Executive's already had significant experience, and bears the scars in relation to a previous, his was a city deal, and he'll be able to tell you that sometimes the projects will be different from those which you originally bid for, but these are the ones that we think have the greatest strength around them, but we're happy to be flexible around that. And then we've got one line in there that says prepare for delivery, and that's an enormous amount of work that's involved in that one sentence. I will say that the only other thing I will say about this is that we have recently welcomed the University of Stirling onto our steering group, the Economic Partnership, which is a really good asset for us. They're doing a lot of work at the moment around this sustainability agenda, which will be very useful for us moving forward. And that also, the discussions that we've been having with Stirling and Clacks Council, who obviously have their city deal, means that there's things that we can do on a region-wide basis as well that will give us a bit more of a foundation moving forward. So that's a quick race through the project. As I say, the document's attached to the report. I commend the recommendations to members at paragraph 2, and Laura and I will endeavour to answer any of your questions.
Okay, thank you for that, Rona, and indeed Laura for the work in putting together the bid. Councillor Alexander?
Yes, Convener, it's a tremendous opportunity for us, and the fact that we don't know obviously yet what the allocation is going to be, but we have the confidence that it's going to be substantial because of particularly the work that's been done by Rona and her team. Who have been absolutely fantastic in terms of meeting deadlines, and in terms of it sounds a difficult job to do, or it sounds an easy job to do in terms of picking up priorities for investment, but it's a lot more detailed than that, and certainly it's a lot more structured than that. There's a real opportunity here to make Grangemouth a national centre in a way that perhaps isn't at the moment, or is known for the wrong particular reasons. The issue of carbon emissions is something that has been around us for some considerable time, and this would give us an opportunity to remedy that situation. And of the investment in infrastructure in Grangemouth, it would recognise its role as a national centre for excellence and for the green economy. And the green economy is going to become even more important than it is at the moment even. I'd just like to say, as well as paying tribute to the members of Rona's team who have worked on this for the last couple of years, I'd also like to pay tribute to yourself, Convener. There's not many leaders of Falkirk Council have been named in the House of Commons in such a glowing way as you were when you visited earlier on this year. And that's something that I think we're grateful for. The manner in which you've pursued this has certainly helped me as the portfolio holder for but certainly has also helped the officers and helped the politicians and civil servants understand what we are seeking. So I think we should recognise that particular role that you played in that, Convener, and I would like to publicly do so. Coming back to the report itself, I think the people of Grangemouth will welcome this. Now, obviously, there's uncertainty in terms of the amount, but I'm pretty sure that they will welcome this to a man or a woman in this because of the history of Grangemouth, because of the changing need in Grangemouth, and because of the ability and the desirability of the retention of the jobs that we have at the moment, but also the expansion. We've heard 6,000 new jobs is the anticipated outcome of this particular exercise, and again, it sounds like a massive figure, but the fact that the officers have the confidence to actually indicate that a figure at all shows, I think, how much they've developed the programme and how much they've developed a relationship with the local industry and with civil servants and members of both parliaments. And again, I think it highlights as well the level of commitment by our elected politicians in the area who have contested and fought for this particular programme for some time. There's obviously, this is a relatively early stage in terms of the staff that are involved. I may not believe so, because they've worked solidly at it for the last 2 years. And that's something to be proud of. It certainly gives us the opportunity, I think, to move the district forward, particularly Grangemouth, but there will be, the very scale of it means that there's going to be a benefit to Falkirk, there's going to be a benefit to Bowness, there's going to be benefits all round, and that's something that's to be welcomed. So with that, Convener, I'd formally welcome the report and formally move the recommendations contained within it.
Thank you, Councillor Alexander. Councillor Hughes.
And I will formally second.
I think it's important that we emphasise that there will be a ripple effect of the investment within Grangemouth that will spread throughout Falkirk District and beyond as these projects go forward. And I think that's why there is such significance about this particular growth deal nationally and what it can actually do for the Scottish economy and indeed the UK economy. Okay, Councillor Coombs.
Yep, agreed. These are fantastic opportunities and the benefits will ripple across Falkirk. But the first line of there, as a resident of Grangemouth, I have to say, it's like, so I was interested to see that when we were talking about the investment and the industry, it was pictures of Grangemouth, but when we talked about great places, it was pictures of the steeple in Falkirk. And I think that it would be remiss of me not to mention that we really, really have to be aware of the areas in Grangemouth that suffer a lot from lack of investment, and the residents should be key to this. I'm trying to remember, it was in the LD, not the LDP, in the National Planning Framework 3, I think it was, that I wrote a submission that actually the government had to include in their considerations of the investment and the importance of the industry in Grangemouth, which I think got about 3 or 4 mentions in the national planning framework, that the residents there there should be cognisance paid to the impact of the industry on the people there, not only on the housing and the air quality. And it was mentioned, but very briefly by Rona, the fact that Grangemouth does produce more carbon than anywhere else in Scotland, and not just marginally, but by a long chalk. So whilst I'm happy to see that there is carbon capture being looked at as a possibility, then I think what I'm trying to say here is that this all sounds wonderful, but it sounds more wonderful if you live in Falkirk than it does if you live in Grangemouth. I think the extra industry and the extra benefits to the economy that will have this ripple effect across Falkirk and indeed the whole of Scotland, we need to remember that people do live in Grangemouth, and that Grangemouth as a destination of choice isn't. It's good for industry, it's not great to live there, and I think that we need to make more effort to do something about that. And I think, again, the town centres and the tourism and all the rest of it, unless there is a specific focus put on the other aspects of Grangemouth that aren't just about industry. It is where people live, and the town centre certainly needs a lot more work done to it and a lot more investment, and hopefully that will come with this. But I think that we need to highlight that.
There was an event on Saturday in Grangemouth, a locality planning feedback event, and we were able to showcase the growth deal there and the benefits. It was actually very warmly welcomed, but that's not all that's going on. There's an awful lot of other things that are going on, particularly in looking at investment around the town centre. But there's also a lot of work going on with the industries and changing their practices around the low carbon agenda and changing how they're doing that. And that has come as a result of a significant policy change at both government level. And they know that this investment will not come unless it is in line with the government policies. So there's a tremendous amount of work and a sea change going on and a different focus, particularly around the industries in Grangemouth. That's why there is a drive within this. And I'm going to bring in the Chief Executive because he attended the event and has had a number of discussions with some key industries down in Grangemouth around that sea change that has to happen and how that's going to be affected, and that will be over and above just the growth deal stuff.
Thank you, Convener. I suppose that perhaps the first thing to say in relation to the investment zone itself is that in negotiating with government, whilst there will be a significant emphasis on investment to drive economic growth, there will also be a significant emphasis on inclusivity, as Rona said in her presentation. And certainly, from my experience of the Edinburgh City deal, that was something which was, important to government, and that they wanted to see that demonstrated. So when we had this Making Grangemouth Better event on Saturday, and we were talking about the potential impact of the investment zone, we were also talking about the renewal of housing, we were talking about employability, the criticality of ensuring that the creation of new jobs is an opportunity for people in Grangemouth and indeed beyond. But certainly in recent discussions with INEOS, they ran courses this year working with Grangemouth High School, looking at what some of the opportunities were. And I think that's something that both we must have a high expectation of in terms of what we do for people in Grangemouth, but also if that isn't in the investment zone proposal and isn't taken forward in the detailed projects, we'll be challenged on that because there's an absolute expectation. It isn't just about economic growth, it is about inclusivity as well.
Okay, I'm glad to hear that, but as I say, I just, excuse my cynicism, but I don't need to look that far back about the closure of the Bowness Road, where industry gets their own way and the people of the town are pretty much well ignored. But I won't hold my breath, but I look forward to the fruition of what you're saying.
Okay, Councillor Nimmo.
Convener, I'm just wondering, do we currently have a master plan as far as Grangemouth Town Centre is concerned?
It's currently being worked on in a co-productive way with the local communities.
Is there any indication as to what's actually planned for the town centre then?
The exercise that we spoke about, that we attended, the feedback event on Saturday, I have to say the lunch was very good. Thank you to Kersey Bank Project for that. Well attended by local people who were very engaged in the process. But that was as a consequence of the Making Places exercise that had been, for which there was funding came. And that was an extensive engagement project with the local community around what it was they wanted to see come from their local community. And the town centre, as you would expect, was something that came out of that, as were things like housing, and Kenny was there on Saturday with us as well, skills, jobs, those sorts of things. So the town centre, there's work, as you know, you may recall from this, the council don't own that much. We do own something in the town centre, Grangemouth Town Centre, but there is also other owners there as well. So, and there's a provision in the proposals to use the capital grant funding that we've been awarded £1.9 million to do some work in Grangemouth Town Centre too. So as the leader has said, we've had the feedback from the community. That will be the foundation for developing more detailed plans round about Town Centre in Grangemouth to get as part of the housing arrangements and the retail and other businesses that might come forward. So that will be the basis for the master plan, which we will be developing. In one of the slides there, there's reference to place-making plans for Falkirk and Grangemouth. That will feed into that exercise. But we're really off to apply and start with it because we've done this Making Places work, and we've now had that input from the community that will allow us to move things forward. So the answer is outline plan, yes, detailed plans are to follow, but there's provision for that as part of this project.
Okay.
Councillor Munro.
Thank you, Convener. On the face of this sounds absolutely wonderful. We'll generate 6,000 jobs and boost the economy by 400 million annually. However, it's a hugely complex topic, as has already been intimated, and there has to be lots of questions, because this is about investing in industry to create jobs, is it not? And these sorts of schemes have existed for a very long time, and there are a number of organisations who feel that there are other ways in which we can create jobs more successfully. And I'm not sure about some of the aspects in terms of the port, for instance. I mean, I think it's a very good idea to have more infrastructure going into the port. After all, the number of food lorries on our road is something like 25%. But our port is only accessible from the river for 2 hours of the day at the high tide, and nothing is being suggested about that. So we're not going to get any more shipping in. The jobs that are being created around the centres of excellence will be for people with particular skills. The evidence is that in previous iterations of these kind of schemes in other parts of Scotland, jobs have just moved from one investment zone to another. So there are lots of questions. I mean, is this 235 million a grant, or are we contributing to it? Is there a cost to us as a council? It is a huge topic, and I think we've been asked to make a decision on all of this with very little knowledge and time to assimilate or ask all the difficult questions that sit around it.
If I can help you with a couple of those things. I think if to go back to your general point, this is obviously a scheme which has been discussed with members before, and what we're really doing now is saying we've done more work on the specific areas that you asked us to look at, and this is the detail now sitting behind this, but the fundamentals, as I said at the beginning, are largely unchanged. The skills element of it, the point you're making about supporting industry to create jobs, this is what this is designed to do, but it's not about giving money to industry, it's about creating the conditions to allow industry in the private sector, not just industry, but business was probably a better description, to flourish. So for instance, the project that you mentioned about creating better access into the port is to allow the conditions to allow the port to maximise its business with a minimum impact on the community of Grangemouth. To go back to an earlier point that we're making, this is intended to take these heavy vehicles away from residents. But the other element of the project there is, of course, is to improve the rail infrastructure in relation to the port as well, to allow that business to grow as well. And that would then permit the investment required to create perhaps a larger window of time for the vessels to come in and out. That would be an investment decision that requires to be made by Forth Ports itself. You'll know that we are bound by the rules in relation to benefiting one business over another, the state aid rules. And so these projects are intended not to benefit any particular business. They are intended to benefit business and create opportunities for business growth in general. If they were supporting one business only, we wouldn't be able to do them. They would be questionable in respect of state aid rules. Turning to the issue of skills, you're right that the centres of excellence would be populated, would be the employees there would be people with very high skill levels. There's absolutely no reason why our youngsters, some of whom I met yesterday at the Elaborate High School, who, full of enthusiasm, wanted to tell me all about what they were doing. I just happened to be in the corridor at bell time. There's no reason why they can't get those jobs, and that's what the work that we're doing through schools and the college that I mentioned is aiming to do, focus around STEM subjects to make sure that when those jobs come along, our youngsters will be able to take up those jobs, and the other jobs that will flow from the whole process. There will be jobs at every level, every skill set, but we have to make sure that our citizens, not just our young people, but other citizens, are upskilled to be able to say, no, I'm going to have that job, and get those jobs in the area.
It's also not just about the direct jobs, it's a supply chain that is then comes on the back of that. And an example that was used at the recent work that INEOS carried out around clearing sites and making sites ready, they found it very difficult to get workers from the locality. And therefore there was an additional cost to bringing those in, that we want to reverse that, so that in the future where there's major infrastructure changes, that these can be local people that are actually getting the benefits of that. So I think, well, yes, there's a focus on the high tariff jobs, that there is opportunities for a whole host of alternative jobs around that. Vast majority of the supply chain services around that industry are located in Grangemouth already, and we want to be able to grow them.
The question regarding how the funding works hasn't been answered.
Oh, sorry. Yes, it's not dissimilar to, in principle, to the TIF thinking, which was, it's not similar, but it is different. In relation to TIF, if you recall, the council borrows the money, it is then allowed to keep the rates income that otherwise would have gone to national government to manage the borrowing costs. And that is on the basis that, but for the investment made in the infrastructures through TIF, the business would not have come, and therefore those rates are as a direct result of that investment. So that's the principle behind TIF. The growth deal principle is similar, and it is that the funding, these businesses would not have come but for the investment in this public, to a large extent, infrastructure, whether it's physical infrastructure or infrastructure around our people. But this is different because the council isn't borrowing in this instance. The money comes to the council from governments, but there is a requirement for these projects to deliver, and to deliver as they expect, and create these outcomes similar to the TIF outcomes, and that economic growth will fund the borrowing, but the borrowing will sit with national government this time rather than sit with the council. So there is an expectation from both sets of government, as you would expect, to say, well, what are other people putting into this project? And we're fortunate in this regard that we can point to contributions that already come from commitments that have already been made from business in the area to sustainable growth, and particularly very large investments that we've seen down in Grangemouth from the large businesses there. They will also look to see what it is that the council can bring to it, although there's no specific provision for Brian Paul's office chairs, there's no specific provision in our capital programme to make any provision to this. But we will obviously, these are principles that the council supports anyway, through its Council of the Future programme or through its investment programme. So we will be able to demonstrate how the investment programme within the council dovetails into the outcomes that we're looking for this, albeit on a whole council basis. So these are all things that will be part of the detailed negotiations, but I do feel very confident that we are able to point to investment commitments that's already been made, particularly from business, and this is where some other deals have struggled a wee bit, and investment and the investment of already council's already made through the TIF, that's a significant investment. We were able to point to those and say those are things that are committed, and more commitment will come from business as these projects roll out. And I think that's where we have a real advantage over other growth deals, whether they be city deals or growth deals throughout Scotland, because we have that very strong base to start with in terms of other contributions from others.
Is it the case that in investment zones that the planning regulations are in some way slightly less onerous for new businesses locating into these zones?
No, that's a separate thing. There is a capacity for. I mean, for instance, we already have. I'm not sure if you hear of it. I think it's called a simplified planning zone or something of that ilk down in Grangemouth already within the port, which means that is designated. It's a bit like saying that they already have consent to a certain extent for types of uses within a certain area. So that may be something that we may be able to look at. But to be honest with you, it's not anything that would come forward would not be inconsistent with an appropriate use for planning in that area anyway, given that a lot of it is already industrial sites that would be being reused for other industrial purposes. What would be required, obviously, is there would be the same stringent controls over things like noise and emissions as is currently the case. But the council has already mentioned NPF3, which has specific provision in it for Grangemouth, and that really counts as part of the planning process as being an indicator of appropriateness for certain types of developments already. So the planning process has already recognised a lot of the work in here already as part of NPF3.
And the actual figures, 6,000 jobs, 400 million annually, what are these figures based on?
It's based on the analysis work that's been done already. Laura's probably, she's still there, probably better placed to give you the detail around about that. But there's been detailed analysis work done around each of the projects and what they might bring back.
Okay. Laura, do you want to add anything to that?
I'm not sure if I can. We have all sorts of economic multipliers, etc., etc. It's quite a technical thing. We put them through. It's almost like a sausage machine, and we come out with figures. So it's an assumption. We assume that if we spend so much, we will get so much into the local economy, and then some of that will multiply, and then we'll get a little bit more. It's quite technical sums. I mean, I'd probably be better talking through them with you separately if you were interested in that. But it is based on very sound analysis. We've had PBA consultants involved, and they're very good economic strategists, and they've come up with these sums, and we've not had anyone from either government or anything disputing that would be the sort of, for the level of investment, that would be the sort of outputs from that.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Bissett.
Thanks, Convener. I welcome this report. It's there's a lot of work going on. I'd like to thank Laura and her team for the amount of work that's went in, and well done getting a mention in Westminster. I know you've been heavily involved in this, and
It's so a commendation to yourself as well. We do have a climate emergency, so I was really pleased to see carbon capture technology being included in this plan as well, and district heating schemes and stuff like that. So it is something I welcome to the area, and it's going to benefit Grangemouth, Falkirk and Scotland as well. And I would like to see, certainly it is heavily leaning toward industry, and I understand why. And there is a concern that, well, I look forward to the spill-off for local communities and that as well. And I'm sure that'll be worked up as we go forward. The 6,000 jobs, will they be permanent jobs, or are these jobs that people will come into the area when there's work going on and then leave again?
I think these are the sort of long-term impacts. I think that to a certain extent these are quite modest figures. We don't want to overstate it. And as Laura says, there's a lot of detailed analysis that sits behind those. But there will be obviously a number of jobs included in that. The construction jobs will be aggregated up, if you like, to a certain extent, so that we can get those as detailed jobs. But we have the detailed information sitting behind that we're happy to share with you. There's reams and reams and reams of it.
No, it's okay. I mean, 6,000 jobs, I mean, that's commendable, eh? I mean,
and as the
that.
convener said, that there's so much more around supply chain elements of this. So, for instance, there will be businesses that we will hope will locate, and we're not obviously not just talking about Grangemouth, but as part of the sites that we've identified, but both that includes Abbotsford and Glenbervie, the Glenbervie site that I've mentioned as well in Larbert. We're hoping that these jobs are identified as associated with those sites. But if you have a business there located, say in Glenbervie, you would expect there would be a supply chain element into that business as well. So there's a potential here for us to, we can't do a detailed analysis until we know the types of business that's going to come. To a certain extent, we've made a guess about that. But these figures are robust because they've been checked and double checked, as Laura says, and they need to be robust because they'll be looked over very carefully by the people from whom we are asking for the money.
That's great. And what else was going to say? Now, given that a lot of this is related to industry, I think you mentioned that local businesses might be contributing. Has INEOS and Carlachem, are they contributing to the package at all? Are they bringing anything to the party, if you like?
Well, one of the things, as I said earlier, that we are able to offer to government in terms of reassurance that if we build it, they will come, is the fact that the levels of investment that have already been made by the likes of INEOS in the area already, there's something like £500 million that's already been invested as part of the new tank, the infrastructure that they put in for the ethane import. So, and also the more recent commitment that they've made to their new CHP, their combined heat and power plant. These are all enormous numbers that they work to. And it's that confidence that we take from that these are businesses that are here to stay because of the level of investment that they are making, but they need to transform away from the carbon-based businesses that they are into something else. And that's where the Innovation Centre comes in, because it's looking at biotech, it's looking at carbon capture, use and storage, I've got it right for once. And also we talked separately about the sustainable bus industry here. So this is here to assist that transformation of those businesses. They've already said in terms of the business that they currently carry out that they're here to stay. They've made that level of investment. Now what they need is a public support, if you like. And this is a policy decision. These will be policy decisions about transforming our economy from carbon-based economy to not. They need support from, on a policy basis from the public sector to be able to turn themselves as businesses into something else. So they're on that journey with us. They are acknowledging that that's what has to happen. They are completely behind this, and they've already invested a lot of money in what they're doing just now. There's no reason to suppose they won't continue to invest in what they will become, because they have a stake in making this a success as much as we do.
Thank you, Convener.
Okay, Councillor Reid.
First of all, congratulations on the report itself. I like the numbering of the paragraphs and the very short sentences which say everything that has to be said. We don't need 3 pages to do that. It was very good to go through it. It was difficult to read the report without being enthusiastic about what's being said. it's almost like a second industrial revolution, to be honest. Which
It's the fourth.
The fourth one, is
It's
it
the
right?
fourth.
I must have missed three somewhere. But we do recall, well, I recall growing up, this was a dirty town, Falkirk, you know, with smoke from the various iron foundries. 4 o'clock, the sirens went and outpoured thousands and thousands of men. Unwashed, by the way, because the ironmasters didn't bother to put showers in, but that's another story. I do like the inclusivity as well of it. £8 million going into Grangemouth, hopefully. And I do think there will be impact on your own budgets. The most important scheme we have at the moment, I think, could benefit with references to a cultural activity. So I think all round, although there requires to be obviously scrutiny, it's a big scheme. I think it moves us up, David, from Division 1 maybe to the Premier League, but that's another story.
On your way.
On your way. So yeah, I would also like, if possible, for other parties perhaps to be involved in some of the discussions that are going on. I don't know if for example, there's a locality planning exercise for Falkirk coming up.
I think just as Patricia mentioned earlier, it's, and we've talked about this at corporate management team, it's almost like the plan's all beginning to come together now.
Yeah,
This is a massive overarching project which will impact not just on our area, our entire area, but indeed the nation. And there's a lot of focus on Falkirk and Grangemouth, and so making sure that everything is aligned. And I think we saw that on Saturday, that was that the work that was being done in the community of Grangemouth was all beginning to come together. We're beginning to see what people were wanting. We could see how that linked into the work that we're doing for the investment zone, and how that's linking into the work that Children's Services are doing, that the IGB is doing, that Stuart and his colleagues in housing are doing. It is all now beginning to come together. And I'm really excited about this. You'll be able to tell that, because I think now we've got a marvellous opportunity to start to deliver on some of these really wicked issues that have plagued us for a while, around things like health, around things like inclusion, around things like attainment, because we've now got this opportunity to there'll be a resource here that we can dedicate into making sure that we're pulling all these threads together, and that people are actually involved, and that people will get the best of it. So I just remembered your point, Councillor Munro, about the risk register. There is an overall risk register for this project, as you would expect, and each of the projects that sit within it will have extensive risk registers. At the moment, the risk associated with this is that we won't get the money, or that we will, or we won't get as much as we've asked for. So that's all we're focusing on just now, is making it, is de-risking this in terms of the bid that we're asking for. And that's really around the way the projects have been shaped. So we've looked at the projects, we've looked at the risk register, we've adjusted the projects to de-risk them. And obviously the amount that we're asking for, and that's the basis on which it's been framed to say this is of national importance. So that's the risk register that sits there just now. Obviously, once we move forward, we will start to see very detailed risk registers around all the detailed projects as well, and that will factor into the corporate risk register that Brian reported on earlier.
I do think the question has to be asked, if we don't go for this, I think the alternative is to stagnate and indeed deteriorate.
Absolutely.
So we've got to go for this big time. I see, I don't know if it's ambitious or not, we may get a result by next March.
But we're hoping it'll move through a process, and we will be in a position to sign heads of terms at that point.
And that's necessarily still quite broad, but that allows us, as I said, to move on to do the detailed business case work in respect of particular projects. So it's quite broad brush at the moment. We don't have an innovation centre of excellence. So what would that actually look like? What would that do? Some of the details are about that will be fleshed out. More links into potential business partners. We'll be doing more work with people like the university that I've mentioned, and the work that we're doing around the sustainability agenda, and the environment centre that's part of their City Deal project, together with the work that we're doing on flood protection as well. So these will all be more detailed works that will go on after we get the 2020 terms report.
Could I be reminded of what the current Prime Minister said when he was on a visit to Scotland? Did he not mention this?
He did.
And what did he say? Is it recorded?
Well, I think there was 300 million million in the pot, but there was 3 growth deals.
But it is recorded that he did say it.
It was mentioned.
Yeah. He was probably whispered in his ear 5 minutes before the speech. Oh, that's cynicism. Sorry. Right. Okay. Thank you.
And the process we're following is not out of kilter with all the other growth deals. It's a process that government kind of take you through in order to get to where you need to be. And we're probably behind the curve a little bit, but I think, you know, as Rona says, we've got the best deal. We've got the best deal that can be seen to demonstrate not just for Falkirk, not just for Scotland, but for the whole of the UK, and that's one of our key selling points, and being able to try and get this over the line and maximise the contributions from government. Just to go back to your locality planning, I think obviously with Fiona Campbell's departure, I think Kenny Gillespie will be picking up the locality planning. Yep. And there is plans to kick off the Falkirk locality planning in the very near future. Is there anything you want to add on that? Sorry for putting you in the spot, Kenny, but...
Sorry, yes. Yes, one of the things we still have to do is the central locality planning. We're taking main issues reporting now, we're pulling that together. We're also looking at lessons learned from looking at the east and the west, and seeing if we can look at doing something different. We talked about culture and how we're going to do it, looking at getting our community involved really at the first point of contact, and then bringing that there. So this is something that myself and the team are looking at, and all with our partners, to make sure that we can radically look at this and see what we've done there in the east and the west and change that and see what lessons we can learn from that.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Nimmo?
Thanks, Convener. Just in relation to Grangemouth and in particular INEOS, I'm just wondering if there's going to be any long-term implications in relation to the fracking ban and the possible investment that INEOS has made in Grangemouth.
As far as I'm aware, they have the investments that have been made are in relation to, well, I do know this, they're in relation to their business as it currently stands. Obviously, with the current situation in relation to fracking, there's been no, I would suspect there've been no investment decisions made around anything that would be required for that until such time as that was more certain. But none of the project is predicated on that type of business.
Okay, Councillor Alexander, do you want to say anything? Any final comments?
Yeah, just that this is a time for optimism. It's a time for looking ahead rather than back. And it's a time that we should be celebrating. I think generally the comments around the table have been positive, and we welcome that. We said in other projects that we want to see the full council going together as one, and that's something that we still strive to achieve. The council always speaks with more authority if it speaks as one voice, and it's something that should be kept in mind. It's a time for ambition. It's not a time for cynicism, and it's certainly not a time for looking at the minutiae. It's a time for forming the strategic direction of the local authority, and working in conjunction with the private sector, the voluntary sector and the public sector to achieve that. So I'm happy with the comments around the table. I can assure members that there will be benefits for the community. I understand Joan's feeling of attachment to our hometown, but even the ward that she represents, I think, will benefit from some community participation at Lambert and Stennismuir and Lambert. So I'm more than happy with the outcome this morning, Convener, and again, just thank you for your indulgence in this.
Thank you. Okay, happy to agree the report.
Convener, can I just last, if you don't mind? I agree with Councillor Alexander saying regarding sort of working together across this, and I would just wonder if from a Labour Group point of view, if we could maybe be a bit more involved in any of the discussions, you know, anything that's going on, because we really don't know a great deal about it. But other than seeing it as a sort of fait accompli today, so I mean a bit more detail. I think that's what I'm looking for. A bit more engagement with the Labour Group, if you like.
Okay, we can look to how we can do that, but I have to say this, as the Director said, this isn't the first time that these have been in front, and there's been a number of all-member briefings on this as we have gone through the process. So I'm not sure what further engagement we can manage,
Well,
but I was certainly happy to look at what we can do.
But anything at all that we could be maybe part of, I'd be happy with that. And my last question, if you would indulge me, it would be, will there be a report comes forward on sort of more specific what the projects are, so we can have a really good look?
Agenda item 10, if Brian's still with us, the capital programme update.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, this is the second update report on the capital programme for this financial year. Section 4.1 deals first with the general fund, and you can see the little table at the bottom of that first page summarises the position, and that's expanded on later in the report, as we'll see. Paras 413 right through to 4139 take each of the service areas, and the bullets there give an overview of the main projects in each of these service areas. In 4.2, section 4.2, we pick up on that summary table on the first page and expand it somewhat. So the little table in 4.2.1 has two components. The lesser element is the funding from external sources, which is explained further in para 4.2.2. But the slippage element, which will be of more interest, just over £1 million, is taken down and exploded in the table in para 4.2.3. So you can see the component elements deriving that. Executive will recall on the back of concern expressed last year on the level of slippage that we undertook a review and introduced for the current financial year some new arrangements to try and tighten up management of the programme and reduce or mitigate the level of slippage. And in para 4.2.5 we set out the application of that, and there's several projects listed in the table that now fall to be picked up by corporate management team, and that will be done so at the forthcoming meeting on Monday, where we'll look to drill down and explore in a bit more detail the reasons for that, and ensure that there's appropriate accountability. Turning to the HRA, the Housing Capital Programme, that's set out in section 4.5. There's only been the smallest of movements since the position reported to you in August. And again, we take each of the spend blocks in paras 4.5.2 onwards, and again give an overview of what the position is. In the last of these paras, 4.5.7, it's maybe worth just highlighting the reference to Gary Place and the close association with the major Council of the Future project closer to home. In terms of resources, the positions summarised in section 4.6, the various components: capital finance from current revenue, government grant, and of course borrowing. 4.7, and more particularly the appendix, picks up on the requirement to produce prudential indicators, and as is now a standard feature in those capital reports. In section 4.8, just drawing the strong linkage between capital investment and the treasury management activity, borrowing in other words. And the final section of the report is the two capital reserves, one capital receipts in 491 and capital grants, which will expand more fully in subsequent reports to capture properly the Section 75 contributions. So that takes us back to the recommendations as set out in Section 2 of the report, and you can see the three of them presented there. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Brian. I think we welcome the more robust monitoring of the capital programme, and hopefully that will start to bear some fruit in at least moving some of the projects on. And it's accepted that slippage is inevitable in capital programmes for a wide variety of reasons, but I think we can be assured now that we are doing everything we can to minimise that. I'm content that things are on track for this moment in time. I'm happy to move the recommendations in the report.
Happy to formally second.
Thank you, Councillor Hughes. Any questions or queries in relation to?
Just to welcome the new procedure, I can see these miscreants standing outside the head teacher's door. Ready to get a good caning or otherwise.
I don't think we can advocate corporal punishment, but I think a good talking to. But I think having project managers. Moving on to item 11, residential short breaks, Thornton Gardens, Bonnybridge. Patricia, are you going to take that? Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. This report deals with a proposal which was agreed in relation to the change in service by the IGB at its meeting in April. We currently provide a residential short break service within the Rowans, which is one of the bungalows within the grounds of the old Forth Valley Royal Hospital. It became apparent in spring of this year that there was a substantial structural problem with the building, principally the floor is beginning to buckle, and obviously that makes it less suitable for people to be cared for in that environment. Members of the executive will be aware that about 18 months ago, Beeld Housing took a decision to close its residential provision within Thornton Gardens and Bonnybridge, and that closed in April 2018. The report details the complexity of the lease agreement with Beeld and the council, and the status of a housing association grant which Beeld received to the value of £524,000 towards the cost of the build of the building, and the organisation leased the ground.
Is decisions taken under delegated powers? Colin?
Yes, thank you, Convener. This is just a brief information report, and it follows on from one you had at your last meeting as well. Where a decision is taken under recess powers, it's a requirement to report that decision to the executive for information. There was one taken close to the last executive meeting, and accordingly it didn't make it onto the report that you considered last time, and this is just to provide you with the information on that decision, and you can see that it relates to the refurbishment of the Mariner Centre.
And just for clarity, this was a decision that was taken by Council at the budget in relation to capital monies given to the Trust. Okay, any questions in relation to that? No, thank you.